In the year 2452, humanity had finally taken its first step beyond the confines of their own solar system. The pioneers had successfully colonized planets in nearby star systems, but still the vast stretches of the universe remained largely unexplored. That is, until the discovery of the Astrolese, a ship designed to journey beyond the boundaries of known space. It wasn't just a starship, it was a symbol of mankind's unyielding spirit to explore, to push the limits of what was possible. The ship, a marvel of human engineering, was not just outfitted with advanced propulsion systems and artificial gravity, but also contained the latest AI-driven technologies that could predict and respond to unforeseen dangers. Captain Silas Hawke stood on the command deck, his fingers resting lightly on the console, his gaze fixed on the viewscreen that showed the swirling depths of space. This was the beginning of the grandest adventure in human history, and he was chosen to lead it. "All systems online," said Commander Alice Rivers, her voice sharp as always. She was the second in command, a brilliant tactician with an unmatched understanding of spacetime dynamics. "Ready for launch," replied Silas, his eyes scanning the crew as they made their final preparations. There was a mix of excitement and trepidation in the air, but Silas had always believed in the potential of humankind to conquer the unknown. If anyone could do it, it was them. The mission was simple: journey beyond the boundaries of known space, chart unexplored galaxies, and establish first contact with any civilizations they might encounter. Their objective was to answer the most profound questions that had plagued humanity for centuries. What else lies out there in the great expanse? Was humanity truly alone in the universe? Silas had served in the military, and his combat experience had hardened him into a natural leader. He knew the risks involved in this mission, but his desire to witness the uncharted wonders of the cosmos eclipsed the fear. The crew, a carefully selected mix of scientists, engineers, and explorers, were ready. He could feel the tension in the air, but there was also a collective sense of wonder. As the Astrolese broke free of Earth's atmosphere and into the cold blackness of space, the crew gathered in the observation lounge, staring out at the vastness that lay before them. The familiar stars of the Milky Way slowly faded from view, replaced by the unknown lights of distant galaxies. Silas addressed his crew over the comms, his voice steady but filled with the anticipation of what was to come. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are the first of our kind to venture into the true unknown. The galaxies await, and we will uncover their secrets. Together we will make history." The room was silent for a moment, before a ripple of applause echoed through the ship. The sound of their unity filled the vast chamber, and Silas felt a surge of pride. They were a team ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. But even as the ship hurtled forward into the dark, a sense of foreboding lingered at the edges of Silas's mind. No mission this grand came without its dangers. As the ship passed the last fringes of the solar system, a sudden anomaly appeared on their sensors. "Captain, we're picking up an unidentified object just ahead," said Lieutenant Marcos, the ship's sensor officer. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension. Silas narrowed his eyes and gave the order. "Bring it up on the main screen." The object appeared on the display, a massive structure, impossibly large, drifting in the void. It seemed like it had been there for eons, untouched by the hands of time. Its surface was covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly, a language no one on board could recognize. "Prepare to make contact," Silas ordered, but in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was more than just a relic. It was a warning. Something about this unknown object felt wrong, as if it were calling to them from the edges of the universe. And with that, the Astrolese sailed onward, toward a mystery that would change the course of history for better or for worse. As the Astrolese approached the massive, drifting structure, an eerie silence took over the crew. Every station was manned and every officer was focused, but the tension was palpable. The object had no clear origin. No ship or natural phenomenon could explain its presence. Its sheer scale dwarfed the Astrolese, and its glowing symbols pulsed rhythmically like the heartbeat of an ancient machine. Silas stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the display. He could see the structure in greater detail now. Gigantic spires and towers rose from a central core, like a city suspended in space. The surface was smooth and dark, with the occasional flashing rune-like light etched across its surface, as though it had a pulse of its own. "Bring us closer, slowly," Silas commanded. Lieutenant Marcos adjusted the ship's trajectory, and the Astrolese drifted toward the object, careful not to make any sudden moves. Commander Alice Rivers stood nearby, her arms folded, watching the monitors with a practiced, analytical gaze. "Captain," she began, "this is unlike anything we've encountered before. The material composition of the object seems to be beyond anything in our records. It doesn't match any known alloys, and the energy readings are fluctuating unpredictably. We need to know what it is, Silas said, his voice steady, though a strange knot had formed in his stomach. Open a comm channel. Despite the unease among the crew, they all knew what had to be done. There had to be some way to communicate with whatever had left this ancient relic behind. They had come this far, they couldn't turn back now. The comms officer, Lieutenant Lucia, tapped into the frequencies, but instead of the usual hum of space communication, there was only static, unsettling, low-frequency interference that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ship. Silas frowned. Can you trace the source? Negative, sir, Lucia replied, her voice tight. It's not coming from a single point. It's all around us, as if the object itself is broadcasting the static. Is it alive? Alice asked, half in jest, but there was a seriousness in her tone. The crew shared a brief, uncomfortable glance. The thought had crossed all of their minds. Let's not jump to conclusions, Silas said, trying to remain calm. Proceed with caution. With that, they initiated a deeper scan of the object. As the ship moved closer, the symbols on the structure seemed to change, shifting and reorganizing into patterns too complex for human understanding. It was as if the structure itself was reacting to their presence. Suddenly the entire ship shuddered. Alarms blared and the lights flickered. Status? Silas barked. We're being pulled toward it, Marcos reported. Our trajectory is off. The gravitational pull of the structure, it's like nothing we've seen before. It's as if it has its own gravitational field. The Astrolese lurched forward. Silas gripped the armrest of his seat, heart racing. The pull was too strong to fight, and in moments the ship was heading directly toward the structure's massive core. Brace for impact, Silas shouted. But instead of crashing, something strange happened. The pull, which had seemed overwhelming, began to weaken as they got closer. The gravitational force dissipated, and the ship floated gently to a stop a few hundred meters from the object's surface. That wasn't normal, Lieutenant Marcos muttered, eyes wide. It's almost like the structure recognized us? Or it's toying with us, Alice added, her voice laced with suspicion. The crew was silent, uncertainty hanging heavily in the air. The ancient object loomed before them, dark and mysterious, but something had shifted. The Astrolese was no longer in control, and neither were they. They had entered something far beyond their understanding. The glowing symbols on the object's surface began to pulse faster, and a low hum emanated from within. The sound was almost melodic, a rhythm that felt ancient yet alive. We need to get a closer look, Silas decided. Prepare an away team. We're going in. The crew gathered around, steeling themselves for whatever lay ahead. None of them knew what awaited them on that alien surface, but they were committed. This was their mission. This was their moment. As the away team suited up and prepared to board, Silas took one last look at the dark expanse outside. The stars in the distance seemed faint compared to the mystery right in front of them. He had no way of knowing what they would find on that ancient structure, but one thing was certain: the journey had only just begun. The away team, consisting of Silas, Alice, Marcos, Lucia, and a handful of engineers, prepared to disembark onto the ancient structure. Their suits, designed to withstand extreme environments, shimmered with the glow of their internal lights as they checked their equipment. With every step, the weight of the unknown settled more heavily upon them. The Astrolese hovered above them, its engines humming quietly in the distance. Let's move out, Silas ordered, his voice unwavering, but his mind raced with the possibilities. They made their way to the airlock, their boots echoing against the metallic floors of the ship. As the hatch opened and the vacuum of space greeted them, they stepped out onto the surface of the massive object. The surface was unnaturally smooth, giving the impression of a polished gemstone, despite its dark hue. No obvious seams or joints were visible. This wasn't a ship or a structure built with human hands. It felt ancient, untouched by time, and yet, still intact. The symbols etched into the surface glowed with an eerie blue light, pulsing in a rhythmic pattern. Stay alert, Silas said, his voice crackling over their comms. We have no idea what we're dealing with here. As they advanced, the ground beneath their feet seemed to hum. The air was cool, filled with a strange tension. There were no signs of any obvious entrances, no doorways, no panels. Just the vast, smooth surface stretching out before them. But as they walked, something changed. The symbols they passed over began to shift, rearranging themselves in response to their presence. Are you seeing this? Alice asked, her eyes glued to the pattern shifting beneath her feet. Yeah, Marcos replied, voice tense. This is not normal. It's like the entire structure is alive. Silas nodded but kept moving forward. Keep going. We're looking for some kind of entrance some way inside. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed beneath them. The structure trembled as if awakening. The ground ahead of them began to break apart, revealing a massive circular aperture that descended into the depths of the object. It was as if the structure was inviting them in. Silas motioned for the team to approach cautiously. The aperture, despite its enormous size, seemed perfectly symmetrical, unnaturally so. The edges glowed faintly, as if it were made from the same energy that powered the mysterious symbols. "Well, it looks like we have our way in," said Lucia, sounding both relieved and apprehensive. Marco stepped forward, inspecting the opening. "We've never encountered anything like this before. This is beyond our current understanding of engineering." "It's beyond everything," Alice muttered, her eyes scanning the surrounding environment for any signs of movement. They stepped into the opening, and as they descended, the passage narrowed slightly. The walls, once dark and featureless, now began to pulse with more intensity. The air inside was thicker, charged with an electric hum. The deeper they ventured, the more the symbols along the walls seemed to glow and shift in a sequence, almost as if they were guiding them. After what felt like an eternity of moving through the narrow passageways, they arrived at a large, open chamber. It was unlike anything they had seen. The space was vast, stretching far beyond the capabilities of their lights, and in the center stood a massive structure, a towering spire that seemed to extend into infinity. The spire was made of the same material as the walls, but it hummed with an intensity far greater than anything they had encountered. "Is this some sort of temple?" Marcos asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alice's gaze was fixed on the spire. "It doesn't feel like a temple. More like a control center? Or a core." Suddenly, the lights of their suits flickered. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the air seemed to charge with energy. Silas barely had time to react before the symbols on the wall shifted violently, glowing brighter and faster. The spire in the center of the room began to tremble, and then, it moved. Sections of the structure shifted, revealing an opening at its apex. At that moment, the hum of the object grew deafening, and the air filled with a strange vibration that rattled their bones. Then a deep, rumbling voice echoed through the chamber, not in a language they could understand, but in a tone that conveyed a warning. "You are not meant to be here," the voice seemed to say. The tone was not angry but heavy, laden with ancient knowledge. The team froze in place, their hearts racing. Silas's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the warning. Was it a threat? A plea for them to leave? The sensation of being watched was palpable, the feeling of being so small in the face of something so immense and old. "Get to the center of the spire," Silas ordered, his voice sharp. The mission had to continue despite the overwhelming sense of danger. As they moved toward the spire's opening, the air thickened even more. They could feel the power emanating from the core, its energy pressing down on them, almost suffocating. It was clear now, the structure was not just a relic but a key, and it was alive, reacting to their presence. The door at the spire's peak opened just wide enough for them to slip through. Inside was a large, spherical chamber with walls made of the same dark material. The only source of light was a strange, glowing orb in the center of the room. "This is it," Alice said, her voice awestruck. "This must be what's powering the entire structure." Silas approached the orb cautiously. As he got closer, it pulsed with light, and the symbols that had been flickering throughout the structure began to glow brighter. He extended his hand toward the orb, and as his fingers brushed against its surface, the ground beneath them shook violently. The orb flared to life. And in that instant, the room seemed to twist and warp, revealing glimpses of distant stars, alien landscapes, and strange creatures, visions of civilizations long gone and those yet to come. Then everything stopped. Silence filled the chamber and the orb dimmed, its energy dissipating. But something had changed. The structure seemed to quiet as if it had made a decision. "Get back to the Astrolese," Silas said urgently. Now. They turned, but the path they had come from was no longer there. The structure had begun to shift again and they were trapped. What had they unleashed? What was the structure trying to tell them? Before they could answer that, the walls began to close in, sealing them inside the heart of the forgotten relic. The walls of the chamber groaned, shifting with an unsettling metallic creak, as if the entire structure were waking up to something far beyond the crew's comprehension. The silence that had followed the orb's mysterious activation now pulsed with a low hum that resonated deep in their bones. Silas felt it first, a creeping pressure building in the air. Something was happening. The mission had already spiraled far beyond their expectations, and now, it seemed that whatever ancient intelligence had once constructed this place was fully aware of their presence. "We need to move now," Silas said, voice tight with urgency as the walls around them began to converge. The exit, the one they had entered through, was no longer visible. It was as if the space itself had shifted, erasing their path. The away team quickly gathered their bearings, turning in all directions, searching for any sign of escape. But the once smooth, symmetrical chamber now appeared distorted, with jagged edges and shifting geometries. The spherical orb at the center of the room pulsed again, and Silas could feel the weight of its ancient power as it seemed to stare down at them, its light flickering in an almost sentient rhythm. "How are we supposed to get out?" Marcos muttered, panic edging his tone. Alice was already moving toward the walls, her gloved hands tracing the dark surface. "The walls aren't solid. They're shifting, almost like they're alive," she said, her voice both fascinated and concerned. Suddenly, the hum grew louder, the air in the chamber seeming to vibrate with energy. A shadow shifted in the far corner, stretching toward them like an ethereal mist, and the temperature dropped. A cold wind whispered through the room, a reminder that this was no ordinary structure. The crew paused, eyes scanning the shifting shadows. "I don't like this," Lucia said, her voice trembling as she reached for her weapon. "Whatever we triggered, it's not happy with us." Just as she spoke, the orb in the center of the room flared brightly, and a deep voice, low and resonant, boomed from the walls, echoing across the chamber. "Why do you disturb the slumber of the forgotten ones?" The voice was not like anything they had heard before. It was both mechanical and organic, reverberating as though the entire structure itself were speaking through 1,000 voices, layered and ancient. Silas froze, trying to make sense of the words. "Who are you?" he called into the silence that followed, his voice a mix of command and caution. "Those who sought the power of the stars and the knowledge of the cosmos," the voice responded. "You have awakened the seed of the void. You are not the first to wander here. But you may be the last." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The weight of the words hung heavy in the air. This was no simple relic. This was a weapon, or perhaps something even more dangerous. "We didn't mean any harm," Silas said, trying to steady his breath. "We were exploring. Looking for knowledge." "The knowledge you seek is not yours to claim," the voice replied, its tone colder now, like the bitter winds of space itself. "The knowledge of the void is forbidden." Suddenly, the walls of the chamber pulsed with an otherworldly energy. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the spire at the center of the room began to glow with blinding intensity. The orb's light flickered like a heartbeat, syncing with the deep rumble that now emanated from within the walls. Silas's heart raced. "We need to get out of here now." He turned to the team. "Move." But as they attempted to retreat, the walls shifted, now solidifying into an unyielding barrier. They were trapped. The only light in the room was from the orb, which now seemed to throb and sync with their very pulses. The ground around them began to crack and split open, revealing dark, swirling tendrils that extended toward them, as if the structure itself was awakening and reaching out to claim them. Alice was the first to react, raising her weapon and firing a shot at the nearest tendril. But the beam simply dissipated, absorbed by the dark energy emanating from the structure. "Nothing's working," she shouted, backing away from the approaching tendrils. "We have to find a way to sever the connection, disconnect it from whatever's powering it," Marco said, his voice filled with frantic determination. "This isn't just a trap. This is a force of nature." Silas looked at the team, his mind racing. The symbols they had seen earlier were no longer shifting randomly, they were now forming specific patterns, each one corresponding to a sequence of actions. The voice, the structure, the orb, it all seemed to be connected. But to what end? "That orb," Silas muttered, turning to Alice. "I think it's the key. We have to destroy it before the structure fully activates." Before Alice could respond, a loud crash echoed through the room, and a massive section of the wall split open. The shadowy tendrils, now thickening into solid forms, poured from the cracks. The tendrils twisted and spiraled toward them, moving with a terrifying purpose. "They're coming for us," Lucia said, backing toward the orb. "We don't have much time," Silas snapped. "Alice, cover us while I try to get to the core." With weapons drawn, Alice provided cover fire, holding back the tendrils as best as she could, but they kept coming, unstoppable, relentless. Meanwhile, Silas, Marcos, and Lucia sprinted toward the orb, its light now blinding in intensity. Every step they took felt like an eternity, the energy in the room growing unbearable. Silas reached the orb first. Its surface hummed with ancient power, but the symbols now lined up with perfect clarity, an intricate pattern he had missed before. "Alice, get over here," Silas shouted. "We need to figure out how to disable it." Alice sprinted to his side, dodging the encroaching tendrils. Together, they studied the symbols, realizing that the orb was reacting to their presence in a specific sequence. "Marcos, do you see it?" Silas called out. Marcos, still fending off the tendrils, yelled, "Yes. The symbols, they correspond to our energy signatures. If we reverse the sequence, it might overload the core." Without wasting another second, Silas and Alice began manipulating the patterns of light that glowed on the orb's surface. The symbols shifted under their fingers, flickering wildly. The ground beneath them trembled violently as the structure seemed to resist them, but Silas and Alice were determined. Then, just as the tendrils reached the orb, they completed the sequence. The orb pulsed one final time, and the room erupted in a blinding explosion of light. And then everything went dark. When Silas regained consciousness, he was floating. The light from the orb had consumed everything, and yet, he was somehow unscathed. Slowly he opened his eyes, his surroundings a blurry mess of shifting shadows and faint, fading glows. The pulsing light of the orb had extinguished, and the energy of the structure had died down, leaving only a heavy, lingering silence. "Captain?" Alice's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and concerned. She appeared beside him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her helmet light. "Are you all right?" Silas blinked, disoriented, before he managed to sit up. The chamber was completely changed. What had been a claustrophobic, dark space was now vast and wide, as though the entire structure had shifted, reconfigured itself in the wake of the explosion. The walls had crumbled away to reveal a massive cavern, filled with strange crystalline formations that hummed with residual energy. "The orb," Silas muttered. "It worked, it overloaded." Alice's expression darkened. "But at what cost? The structure, it's still alive. It didn't shut down completely. It's reacting to us." Silas nodded, his mind racing. The tendrils had disappeared, but their absence didn't offer much comfort. He could still feel the weight of the place pressing on his chest, making him acutely aware that they were not alone. "Not anymore. We need to find the others," Silas said, pushing himself to his feet. The ground beneath them felt stable, but the constant hum in the air suggested that the ancient relic was far from dormant. They made their way toward the center of the cavern, where the orb had once been. The space had expanded to reveal a colossal structure beneath them. The entire floor was now covered in shifting patterns, symbols like the ones they had seen earlier, but these were moving, almost like living creatures, swirling in intricate patterns as if trying to communicate. The air was thick with energy, and Silas could feel it coursing through his veins, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "What happened to the others?" Lucia's voice crackled over their comms, breaking the silence and drawing their attention. "We're here, Lucia," Alice responded quickly, her tone tense. "Where are you?" Lucia's voice cut off with a sharp gasp. "Captain. Alice. You need to get here now." Before they could respond, the ground trembled once again. The cavern's walls shifted, and new paths opened up before them, as though the structure was actively guiding them. Silas exchanged a look with Alice, then they rushed toward the source of Lucia's call. As they approached the opening ahead, the walls around them seemed to come alive. The symbols on the surfaces, now glowing more brightly, shifted to form coherent images. They were no longer alien but something familiar. Faces. Human faces. And then a voice, deep, resonant, and unmistakable. "You have awakened the dreamers," it intoned. "Those who once walked among the stars." Silas stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. "What does that mean?" Alice looked back at him. "It's as if they were waiting for us. But we didn't come here for them. We came for answers." "They're not the ones who will give us answers," Silas said, his voice grim. "The dreamers are gone, Alice. And whatever we've unleashed, it's not something we understand." Ahead, the path widened, leading into a vast chamber bathed in a ghostly blue glow. In the center of the room stood Lucia and Marcos, their backs to the team. They were staring up at something, or someone. Silas and Alice moved forward, their boots echoing through the hollowed silence. When they entered the chamber, the sight before them took their breath away. Floating in the center of the room was a being. Not human but humanoid in shape. Its body was translucent, shimmering with blue light, its outline pulsing and shifting in ways that defied natural law. It had no face, no eyes, but its presence was unmistakable. The being radiated a presence far older than anything they had encountered before, a cosmic energy that made the very air around them feel alive. Lucia and Marcos stood frozen, awestruck. Silas stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. "What is that?" "This is the true core," the deep voice from before spoke again, but now it was different. It wasn't coming from the walls, but directly from the entity in the center. The dreamers were but one phase in the evolution of this structure. "We are the keepers. We are the knowledge of the stars, the caretakers of the infinite." Alice stepped forward cautiously. "What do you want from us?" The keeper's form rippled, and a voice answered that seemed to resonate in the minds of the crew. "You came seeking answers, but you were not ready. This place was meant to remain dormant. The seed of the void was meant to sleep. Yet your kind, the humans, you broke the seal." Silas swallowed hard. The seed of the void. It was the artifact they had activated, the source of the power that had woken the structure. The keeper's words made it clear. They had disturbed something far older, far more dangerous, than they could have ever understood. "The seed was not meant for your kind to wield," the keeper intoned, its form flickering as it spoke. "You have awoken us, but the balance has been disrupted. Now you will face the consequences of your actions." Lucia spoke up, her voice shaking. "What do you mean? We didn't come here to destroy anything." "You do not understand," the keeper replied. "You sought to awaken the stars, to claim the knowledge of the ancients. But you have only brought the void closer. The balance of the galaxies is in peril." The air around them grew heavy, thick with the oppressive weight of the keeper's words. Silas could feel the truth behind the being's words, the ancient wisdom of the structure warning them of something catastrophic. "We didn't mean to," Alice started. "You were meant to remain on your world," the keeper interrupted. "But now you have brought the darkness closer. The galaxy will not forgive you. You have awakened the final phase." Suddenly the room darkened and the keeper's form flickered, growing unstable. "The void calls. The stars will die. And you," the voice trailed off, echoing in the hollow room. Then the keeper's figure collapsed inward, disappearing into a burst of blue light, and the cavern around them shook violently. The walls cracked and groaned as the entire structure began to collapse. "We need to get out of here," Silas shouted, grabbing Alice's arm. The team quickly turned and sprinted back toward the path that led to the surface. As they ran, the floor beneath their feet gave way, large chunks of the cavern crumbling into the dark abyss below. The air was thick with the sound of destruction. The structure had decided, they were the ones who had triggered its awakening, and now they would pay the price. But the Astralice was waiting. If they could reach it, they might be able to escape. Silas pushed forward, the weight of the keeper's warning echoing in his mind. The void was coming. And humanity had just made the first step toward its arrival. The walls of the collapsing structure groaned like a dying animal, and the ground shook with a violent force that threw the crew off balance. Silas scrambled to his feet, adrenaline surging through him as he heard the distant rumble of stone and metal cracking, echoing like thunder. Behind him, Alice, Marcos, Lucia, and the others were already in motion, running full speed toward the narrow path that led back to the surface. The keeper's warning echoed in his mind. The void calls. The stars will die. There's no time to waste. Silas shouted, his voice strained as he struggled to keep his footing. The tremors had grown stronger, making every step feel like an uphill battle. The walls around them were starting to collapse in on themselves, and pieces of debris rained down from above. They had to escape or they would be buried alive in the heart of the forgotten relic. Alice's face was taut with determination, though her breath came in short bursts. "We're not going to make it at this rate. The surface is miles away from here. We don't have a choice," Silas barked. "Keep moving." They rounded a corner just as another section of the chamber caved in behind them, filling the air with dust and debris. They ducked and covered their heads instinctively as the rocks and metal crashed around them, barely avoiding being crushed under the falling rubble. "There?" Lucia pointed ahead, her voice cutting through the chaos. A narrow fissure in the wall had opened, revealing a passageway that appeared to lead upward. It was their only chance. Silas didn't hesitate. "This way, go." They sprinted through the jagged opening, their boots kicking up fragments of stone and dirt as they scrambled up the tight, winding passage. The air felt increasingly thick, and every breath seemed harder to take as the pressure around them mounted. They could still feel the presence of the relic, its power surging around them in waves. Whatever it was, whatever it had been designed for, it was not meant for human hands. And now that they had disturbed it, it seemed as though the entire universe was being drawn into its ancient call. "We can't outrun it," Marcos panted, barely keeping up with the group. "The structure is going to collapse, but something else is happening. It's like it's awakening a bigger force. I know, Silas said grimly, though he couldn't fully explain it. The Keeper's warning wasn't just a threat. It's a prophecy. We've triggered something we can't stop. They reached the surface just as the final section of the structure collapsed, sending a shockwave through the ground that sent them stumbling forward into the open air. The sky above was streaked with flashes of light, a reflection of the energy that had been unleashed beneath them. The Astrolese hovered overhead, its engines pulsing with a blue glow that seemed to resonate with the fading hum of the structure. "Get to the ship now?" Silas shouted, urgency in every word. The team bolted toward the landing bay, their hearts pounding as they made their way to safety. But as they neared the Astrolese, something strange began to happen. The stars above them, those familiar points of light they had always taken for granted, began to shift. The constellations twisted, darkened, and then vanished. One by one the stars blinked out of existence. The sky, once a canvas of infinite possibility, was being consumed. Something was happening on a cosmic scale, and the crew could feel it in their very bones. We've set something in motion," Alice said breathlessly as they reached the Astrolese. She looked up at the sky, her face filled with dread. "The stars are dying. The void is coming." Silas climbed into the cockpit, his mind racing. The distant stars that had always been their guide, their hope, were now dimming, fading into an impenetrable darkness. They had awakened something far more dangerous than any ancient artifact. It wasn't just the relic that had been disturbed, it was the balance of the universe itself. "Get us off the ground, Marcos," Silas barked. Marcos wasted no time. He slammed the controls, and the Astrolese shot into the air, the force of the thrusters pressing them back into their seats as they ascended rapidly. Outside the ship, the sky seemed to ripple, a strange disturbance spreading through the very fabric of space. The stars were flickering, some outright vanishing into nothingness. The void was expanding and there was no escaping it. Lucia's voice broke through the chaos. "Captain, this isn't just about us. The galaxy is being consumed. It's like we've awoken a tidal wave, and now it's sweeping across everything." Silas clenched his fists, staring out at the sky. He could feel the pull, a powerful, all-encompassing force. He didn't understand the full scope of what they had done, but he knew one thing: they had unleashed a reckoning. "Alice," Silas said, turning to her. "What can we do? We can't just run. The galaxy is dying in front of us." Alice was silent for a long moment, her eyes wide with the weight of their actions. "There may be a way," she said slowly, her voice strained. "The seed of the void, the artifact we triggered, it's not just a weapon. It's a link, a gateway. If we can find the heart of it, maybe we can reverse the process. But we'd have to go to the source. Back to where it all began." "Where is that?" Silas asked, his voice urgent. Alice met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "The center of the galaxy. The place where the first civilization fell. The location of the original seed." A cold chill ran down Silas's spine. "The heart of the galaxy. The origin of the void. Then we're going to find it," Silas said firmly. "And we're going to stop it." As the Astrolese broke through the atmosphere and into the vast expanse of space, the crew stared into the endless darkness ahead. The stars, once their guiding lights, were now just distant memories. The universe was changing, and with every passing moment, the void grew stronger, closer. But they wouldn't give up. Not now. The journey beyond the stars had only just begun, and it would be their greatest battle yet. The stakes were higher than ever. The infinite galaxies, their galaxies, hung in the balance,